Hi, this is Renee Romeo, and today I'm going to teach you how to reupholster an ottoman. Now, an ottoman like this traditionally sits in front of a chair, wing chair, or something like that. But what I use mine for is I push it up against the side of the bed so that my dogs have a secondary level to jump on before they have to jump on to the very top of the bed. It's very, very tall for them, and they're little tiny dogs. So what I have here, I've actually reupholstered this once before, so this is the third iteration of the ottoman, and you'll see it has some wear and tear to it, so I'm kind of fixing all of these things that went wrong the last time. And what I have my fabric, I have some plain cotton cording that I'll cover with the fabric. That's the piece that goes all along the edge. And I also have some decorative gimp, and the decorative gimp, it can be applied at any surface here, depending on what I wind up with in the end. And I might also go ahead and make the skirt a little bit longer, maybe make the skirt come up to this level and hang from there instead. So I'm going to do a little bit of a redesign, but join me in the process. I'm going to get started ripping this thing apart. The first thing that I need to do is take off the skirt, and what I use is a tack remover. Now, a tack remover is really great for removing staples as well, so you can get right up underneath the staple and pull that out. I also have a pair of pliers on standby in case one of the edges gets stuck and I can't get it out. I can pull it out easily with the pliers. So I'm just going to go along the entire edge here, remove the skirt, and wind up with 4 individual skirt pieces. The skirt is completely off, and you'll see on the inside of the skirt, this is a store-bought piece, so what they do is they use a very thick stabilizer fabric underneath any skirting material that's straight and flat. And so I'm not going to be able to reuse this because I'm making a longer skirt, so this is going to be tossed out, unfortunately. And the other thing is, underneath this, underneath the flap of the skirt, there's a piece of cardboard usually that's in there, and I've reused this twice, so I'm tossing that as well. Everything is going to be new from this point. And the other thing that I've exposed are these little covers for the legs. Now, if you just put the 4 pieces on and eliminated this piece, you would see the leg peeking out underneath. So these need to be addressed as well. So I'll go ahead and take those off and finish disassembling this. Now, this dust cover fabric was not stapled in place. That's probably the way the original piece was done, and that's probably what I did. It's been a number of years since I've done this, so I don't quite remember exactly what I did. So anyway, the 4 legs are off. This piece is just going to pull off, and you'll see, this is a store-bought piece, and it's just cardboard. So I do recall adding some of these pieces of wood so that when the dogs jumped on it, they wouldn't jump through. Now, they're very lightweight, but you never know. And I think that's why I wound up redoing this piece at an angle, because they had caved in one of the corners, so I kind of wanted to beef that up a little bit. So that's maybe what you'll encounter too. So at this point, you may want to go ahead and add some extra pieces of wood in there just to beef up your platform. Beyond that, we're just going to go ahead and take all this off. It's all stapled all the way around. Once that's off, I can show you the next layer. And this cardboard strip, it's traditionally used in areas like this all throughout an upholstered piece. And you'll see, with this tool, I kind of mangle it a little bit on the way out, so that's going to need to be replaced as well. Not a big issue. This is easy to find at your local fabric store in the upholstery department, along with some of these tools. So if you can't find it at your local fabric store, get online, and it's fairly easy to find. So I can lift this layer off, and this I will reuse because I'll make sure that I make all of my subsequent pieces that I'm cutting the exact same size as this piece. But you'll see what I wanted to show you was they have another layer of fabric in here, and this is basically just adding as some type of barrier between the wood and the fabric. And this is really important because you don't want your fabric rubbing up directly next to the wood. It'll wear a little bit quicker, and anytime anybody either sits on this or whatever and rubs up against that fabric, it's going to grind it into that wood. So you're really saving the life of your fabric fabric by keeping this fabric here. So I'll take the cover off and expose this fiber fill underneath. And I'll keep the actual cover for reference when I cut. But I'll show you this. Now, in any piece that I've ever done, there's some foam underneath this, and there is also a piece of fiberfill sheeting over the top of that. And I'm going to keep this in place as well. It's in really good shape, so I don't need to do anything with this at the moment. So I'm going to put this aside and start cutting out the pieces and showing you how to measure for those and make any adjustments if you've got a piece similar to this that you're recovering. I'm in the process of pulling apart these pieces of fabric, and I have a brand new seam ripper, so it's really sharp, and this is what I'm working on. The top cover I'm pulling away from the side piece. But one thing that I exposed here, and I had forgotten, was I upholstered this piece before I had a heavy-duty sewing machine. This is regular thread that I've used here, and you'll see under wear and tear, everyday wear and tear, this is holding up just fine. So you do not need a heavy-duty upholstery machine to pull off this project and have it hold up for you. So just as an FYI, you could just go ahead and use your regular sewing machine. I have the new fabric laid out on my table, and let's talk about how we go about setting our old pieces on top of this new fabric so that everything is going to look nice and uniform all the way around whatever piece you're reupholstering. I have my rectangle. This is the top of the Ottoman, and basically in certain cases this is an all-over pattern. There's really no center motif to it. It's kind of like a crocodile pattern to it. So basically I can take this and I can place it anywhere on this piece and it'll look fine. If you have a piece of fabric that has a definite motif to it, let's say a giant flower that you want to focus in on, you're going to center that right in the middle of this rectangle. And how do you do that? Well, you take your rectangle and you fold it over and then you fold it back, and here is the center point of that flower. So if you have a flower, then you'll take this piece and you're going to just go ahead and unfold it and lay it out, pin it down and cut it, and that is going to be your centerpiece. But mine doesn't have that. I can place it anywhere. So I'm going to place it in the corner, I'll pin it down and I'll cut it out. What I need to do from that point is there's a definite top and a definite bottom to every single roll of fabric. So in that case, when I cut this out, I need to label this piece somehow so that I know exactly where the top of the fabric is. If I don't do that, it's going to wind up looking haphazard as I'm assembling it, and it'll catch light a different way, and I want everything to look nice and uniform all the way around the Ottoman. So once I cut it, I'm going to label it as the top, and then when I go ahead and do my subsequent pieces, like for instance, this piece that I just cut off, or I just pulled off, now this is the piece that goes around the very top edge, and it encircles the whole thing. So what I need to do is lay it out and then label that top and bottom as well, so that when the piece is laying there, it's going to be nice and it's going to look like the light is catching it in exactly the same way that all the subsequent pieces are. So I hope that makes sense to you. I'll show you how I'll label it, and I'll lay all the pieces out for you to see so you can kind of get an idea of where I'm going with that idea. If you're lucky enough to purchase a piece of fabric that has along the edge a little arrow, that arrow will tell you the way the fabric needs to be facing up. It's always pointing in that direction. But in my case, this is a velvet. Velvet doesn't have that. What velvet has is something called nap. And nap is actually the way that the fabric is woven. It has little fibers that stick up that catch light in a certain way. And it's all facing in the same direction. So in other words, this also has an arrow. It's just that you need to be more careful about how you keep track of the way the arrow runs. And the way that I do that is anytime I'm laying out a fabric piece, I will go ahead and get a piece of paper and a pin and put an arrow onto that piece of paper so that I know where the top is. So once I cut this out, this is going to get an arrow piece of paper attached to it. In the case of a skirt, now I'm redoing the length of my skirt, but it's a really good example. If this is the bottom and this is the top and I'm going to lay this out and cut it, then I also need to be aware of where the top is. So once I cut it, this is going to be labeled with an arrow pointing in this direction so that I make sure that all these pieces are going in the right direction. Why do I care? Well, because velvet catches light in a certain way. And if you lay something in the opposite direction, something will appear darker and something will appear lighter. So your panels will be totally off and it's going to look just askew. So you don't want to do that. You really want to take the extra time and label all these pieces. Otherwise, you'll be very, very unhappy with what you wind up with in the end. And it'll just be a matter of, you know, taking a little extra time and keeping track of things a little bit more precisely. Now, before I start guessing at where all of this is going to wind up on the new pieces, and I said that I wanted to make this a little bit deeper as far as this piece that I just pulled off, and I wanted to make the skirt a little bit longer. But how do I do that? Basically, I lay the old piece back on, and I know I want it to be an inch longer, so I've already gone ahead with my Sharpie marker and put a mark right at that spot where it's an inch longer than it used to be. So now I can take that measurement of whatever this depth is and cut this piece at whatever that depth is, and then I can go ahead and take my ruler and I can figure out what my skirt is going to be. So I put the ruler at the very bottom of the leg and I measure up to that spot. Now that spot is going to give me 9 1/4 inches. But I'm not going to cut that at 9 1/4. I have to have a nice finished edge, and I also have to have something that accommodates a carpet. So if you're going to be setting this on top of a carpet, you need to have a little bit of space in between the carpet and the fabric so that it doesn't get stuck on the floor. So we leave it in 1/2 inch space all along the bottom edge. It's not going to be noticeable. Every piece of furniture in your house has that, I'm certain. So leave that 1/2 inch, and then so what you're going to wind up with is not the 9 1/4. You're going to wind up with 8 3/4. That's going to be your finished length of your skirt. So you can go ahead and cut whatever length you'd like based on those principles, just keeping that 1/2 inch along the bottom, and everything will work out fine. So this is that very same piece. It makes the ring, the first ring around the top of the ottoman. And so this is in 4 pieces, but I'm going to do mine in 2. So I've taken the stitching out of the edges, and I'm just going to line this up and add an extra inch so that I can get that depth that I wanted to meet up with the skirt. The last thing I need to cut is the cover for the welt cord. So I have the cotton cording here, and the way that I'm going to measure for this is I'll take the cotton cording and I'm going to lay it on top of the fabric, and then I'm going to pull the fabric over the top of it, so that what I can do is kind of sandwich it in there temporarily. And then I'll go ahead and take my ruler and put it up next to that cotton cord so that I can get making adjustments a 1/2 inch lip right up next to that cord. Now that 1/2 inch lip is going to be what's going to form the casing around. Now what I need are 2 strips to make it all the way around the ottoman. And ordinarily with welt cord, I would say this really needs to be cut on the bias, but again, a bias cut is a 45-degree angle, and that gives you a nice stretch every time you get a piece of welt cord in there. You can make those corners really nice. It'll wrap automatically around the corners. But in our case, this is a velvet, and again, I was talking about nap, and if you go against the nap, you're definitely going to see a color difference in that welt cord all the way around the top. So I'm doing it nice and straight. I'm going right along with my subsequent cuts, and what that'll do is you won't notice any difference in the way that the light catches the welt cord, and it'll look nice and professional. And here's a close-up of how I do that. So I'm just going to take this and sandwich it, And what I'm looking for is this little area here to be a 1/2 inch. So this is the ruler. Put it right up next to that cord, the cotton cord, and I wind up with a 1/2 inch, and then I unwrap it and mark it right there. And that creates 2 inches. And this is what it looks like when it's all cut out. And I've also put the arrows on the welt cord cover as well, just to make sure that everything is catching the light the same way. Well, everything is cut, and before I go ahead and start reassembling the ottoman, I just wanted to show you what I wind up with. I have all of my pieces cut, and what I have are all of the labels are on. They're pinned on with the labels facing up, and I have, as an example here, here's the old fabric pinned to the new fabric, and so I know what this piece is and where it goes, and everything is nicely organized. So when I go to start assembling, I can just grab pieces and know exactly where they go. So I'll get started with the welt cord, and once that's done,
here's a close-up on how you join this welt cord. You want one continuous length, and basically this is a very thick fabric, so you don't want to increase any additional bulk by putting the pieces together like this and just sewing it on straight. You want to distribute that bulk a little bit more evenly. So I have both of my pieces, arrows facing up, and the real trick to this is taking one of the pieces and flipping it over onto the other, and you're going to do this perpendicular. So you'll see I have like this raw edge here. It's going to be lined up here against the other raw edge, and I'm going to pin this. Now what I do from this point, I'm going to sew on a diagonal. So I'm going to sew from this intersection all the way down to this intersection, and then when I open it, it's going to wind up being perfectly lined up all along that seam, and then I can go in ahead in the back and trim away all that excess fabric from behind the seam. Now I know it's a little hard to see. I've been using monofilament thread, and that's a clear thread, but there's the seam line, and so I'm just going to come in very, very close, nice sharp scissors, and trim these off at an angle, you know, pretty close to that. And so when I pull it out, it's nice and even. I have a heavy duty sewing machine here, and I actually have a foot on it that has a little curve in it, so that when I run things like this, like a cotton cord underneath it, it'll keep it in place. And if you don't have that, what you'll want to do is just set up your machine with your zipper foot so that you can get really, really close to this cotton cord. So the cotton cord gets laid in the very center of this this cord cover, and we're just going to sandwich it in there. And what we're going to do at this point is line up the two raw edges, because this is going to make the line that you're going to follow when you're sewing all the way around the very top cover for your ottoman. And then when you also do this, take your cotton cord and maybe move it in a little bit, because you need some overlap space for the finished product. It makes it a little bit easier if you've got a little extra room in there. So go ahead, and if you have a machine like mine, go ahead and lower your foot on top of the cord, and if not, line up your needle to travel right inside the very edge of this cotton cord. So I'm just going to go ahead and start stitching. The welt cord is complete. I'm about to start pinning the welt cord to the top finished fabric of the ottoman. And what I've done at this point is I've taken still my little piece of paper with the arrow on it, and I've transferred it to the new fabric. That way I can keep track of everything from this point forward and making sure everything is going in the right direction as far as the nap is concerned. So now that I have this piece of fabric, all of the fabric is facing this way, I need to take the arrow from my welt cord and face that in the same direction. So this is also facing in this direction. And I can go ahead, pin that in place, and then stitch it and get ready to apply the piece that goes around the entire perimeter. I'm coming to this corner, and so I just wanted to show you how I finished this off. So I'm going to come to this corner, and I'm going to clip this welt cord at a 45-degree angle, almost to the stitching. And this is so I can make a nice corner as I go around the 45. And you'll see how well that works that's going to lay perfect right in the corner. It's going to be a nice even corner. Now that we're coming to the end, I'll show you how I finish this off and join the two pieces of welt cord. So I have to go back in and trim out some of this excess. So I'll get to the cotton cord and I'll trim that off. Now that that's trimmed, I know exactly where the next piece of cotton cord has to be trimmed. It has to be trimmed all the way back here. But I have to do the same thing on this side. Get in there and trim away some of the stitching. Alright, and then pull these two nice and tight. Here's my point where I'm going to trim the cotton cord. Now, as far as the top fabric goes, I'll trim that again at a 45. I do that so that I eliminate bulk by not trimming it this way. It'd be too thick here. So we'll trim that. And then I'll go in, and this one I'm going to trim at a 45 this way. Make room for this. So this piece of fabric goes inside. This goes outside. Now, you could just, if this weren't such a fabric that we're going to unravel, which velvet is, this needs to be turned over so that you don't have a raw edge there. But a lot of times you'll see in professionally upholstered pieces that the raw edge is showing. So now, you see how nice that lines up, and you can't even tell where that seam is because that fabric is distributed. So I'll go ahead and stitch it. And that's how professional that's going to look when it's on the piece. And here's what the top cover looks like when it's done. So all the welt cord is put on there. Then what we'll do is we'll work on this perimeter piece. And I told you mine was in 4 pieces and I decided to cut it into 2 just because that's what I felt like doing. So what I've done is I've taken all of the arrow pieces of paper, transfer them from the old fabric and put them onto the new fabric so that I don't lose track of that. And now I can get rid of this old fabric and show you how I put these two together. So again, the arrows are facing in this direction. What I'll do is you always sew fabric right sides together, and basically with the arrows facing in the same direction, you'll wind up doing this and joining them here. So I will just sandwich them together, right sides together, and go ahead and pin that seam. And stitch this on this end, and then come to the other side and do the exact same thing. Now I have a close-up here of the top corner of the ottoman, and what I'm going to do, I have my side pieces all sewn together, and I have 2 seams. So what I need to do is make sure that one seam is in this corner and then the other seam is in the diagonal corner. And I also have this fabric marked with my arrow. So basically when it's sewn together, it is going to look like this. The seam will be lined up into the corner and all of the fabric will be running in this direction with all the arrows running in this direction. And again, fabric goes right sides together, so I need to sandwich this together. I need to line up this corner right here along this edge. And so I'll take my pin and pin that into place. Now that this is done, I'll move on to the other corner, and then I can go around the entire piece and continue pinning this into place so that it's not going to move around while I'm stitching. And I'm going to be stitching right up against that cotton cording that's underneath. Here it is all pinned on. And you'll kind of see how this cover is coming together. So I still have all of the arrows still on here, so I know where it's all going, and I'll go ahead and stitch it. The top cover is done, and I'm ready to go ahead and place it on top of the existing piece. And like I said, that fiber fill that was stretched over the top is in really good shape. But when I test fit the cover, the corners are a little bit not filled in. So what I need to do is take a little bit of fiberfill and actually place the fiberfill in the cover and then pull it over the top of it and test it just to make sure that it's going to lay nice and tight. As you're doing this, you can kind of see how that's all going to go together. And I'm pulling a little bit tight here, but you need to do that in order to see exactly what it's going to look like. So I need a little bit more fiberfill in my corners. I'm just going to take a little bit of it and just keep experimenting until I get the exact fit that I'm looking for. And this stuff actually, it compresses pretty easily, so you probably need a little bit more than you think. But this is looking really good. So I think what I'm going to do, I'll check the rest of the corners, make sure that they're all great, and then I'm just simply going to take my staple gun and staple this into place at that line that I made earlier, in making sure that everything is all nice and even. So once I get that done, it's going to look super, super nice and tight. So not only the corners are an issue at the top, but you'll see how this is kind of laying. So I'm just going to get in here and fill this out, puff it out, make sure it's going to lay a little bit straighter than it had before, and that way it's not going to look all askew. You certainly don't want that as your finished product. So again, it's a little bit of muscling, but as you go, you'll see how that's going to straighten right out with a little bit of extra fiber fill. Let's take the staple gun and we'll just go ahead and staple this corner in place. Now really muscle it into place because you want it to be super nice and tight. Now I'm lining that bottom edge up with that line, and I'm going to take the staple gun and staple it. Alright, and I'm stapling about 1/4 inch above that line. And you'll see I still have a little bit more work to do here on the corner to get it to puff out, but this one's looking really nice. So I can go ahead and staple 1/4 inch above the entire line as I go, and you'll see, now this is how you do it. This is how you kind of massage and manipulate this fabric. All right, I have this all filled out really well. It looks really nice, nice and taut, just perfect. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and take that dust cover fabric that I took off before and reapply it because it's in really good shape and there's no need to replace it. So basically what I do here, I'm just going to line up all of the holes, the existing holes, and just pin it in place temporarily while I get this ready to staple. And what I'll do is once everything's lined up perfectly, I'm just going to go in about 1/4 inch from the edge and staple all the way around. Now these staples don't need to be close together. They could be a couple of inches apart or so, just enough to keep it in place, and then I'll go ahead and put the legs on. Now I'm working on the side flaps, the flaps that cover the actual legs, and this is a no-sew part of the project. Basically everything is done with hot glue. Now you could do this with hot glue because this is a very thick fabric. It's not going to bleed to the front side of the fabric, and it'll give you really, really quick results. If you have a thinner fabric that you're using, something like a drapery fabric, I would recommend that you stitch this. Either with a serger or just finish off all of your edges along the sides. Right now I'm working on the sides, and I'll show you exactly how I'm going to finish off the bottom edge. But you'll also notice on here that I still have my little tag on here telling me which way is up. So this is the bottom edge. I'll simply go ahead and put hot glue along the bottom and flip it up. And then to finish off the corners, now you've got kind of a double layer of fabric at the corners. I'm just going to trim off some of that bulk. So some of that bulk needs to go away, and we're going to trim that and trim it, and then put a little bit of hot glue in there and squeeze it together. Okay, so you'll see that I have this completely finished front and back, and I'm just going to fold it over in the middle and create a crease so that I know exactly where the middle of this is. And I'm going to place this right onto the corner. And so you'll see now that it's basically lined up with the top fabric, but I do have to double check it and make sure that it's a 1/2 inch off the floor. And I'm going to just pin it in place temporarily. And I'll do that on the other side as well, making sure everything is nice and even. I have my hot glue gun ready to go. Everything is heated up. And so what I have here is the finished side of the skirt. And I still have the label on it with the arrow pointing up. And what I'm going to do is simply, I'm going to work from the bottom side, but I'm going to work from the back side as well. And what I have here, the original piece, which is like this heavy duty skirting material for upholstery, I'm setting aside. I'm not using that anymore. I'm using new buckram that I've cut, and I'm going to go ahead and line this up a 1/2 inch from the bottom edge. Now it's roughly centered on this piece of material, and so all I'm going to do, I'll take a bead of glue, I'll start in the center, and I'm just going to flip this up all along that edge. And you'll see it doesn't take much time at all for this to be secure. So this is going to be the finished edge of your skirting material. And I'm just going to go all along here till I reach the end. All right, and now when you get beyond the end, what you're going to do is you're going to put your glue directly on top of that fabric. And then you're going to take this piece and angle it up slightly. There's a reason for doing that, because we're going to be putting this fabric onto and folding it back onto the back side, creating a nice crisp line there. And you'll see where this ends, it ends a little bit above the actual finished bottom edge, and this is exactly what you want. You don't want this fabric coming below that bottom edge. So by angling that fabric up, you'll create a really nice professional bottom edge. And then you're just going to run a bead of glue underneath there and hold it down. And then the real secret to getting this to look nice and flat when it's finished is you're also going to run a bead of glue in this little pocket at the bottom. So just a little bit of glue is all it takes. Get it nice and flat. Trim off any excess pieces you have, threads you have hanging, and you'll see just how nice and professional that looks. All right, now that both sides are done, we're going to flip it over to the front side, and you'll see I have a little bit of excess buckram sticking out, and I also have to make sure that this is nice and taut as well. So as I go along here, I'm going to hold the bottom and really manipulate the fabric. This is really one of the key things about doing upholstery really well, is manipulating the fabric and making sure that the fabric is laying nice and flat and even and tight. So this is why if you saw with the very top and getting the cover nice and even on there, that's what really helps it look super professional. And the more time you take to do this properly, the better your project is going to look in the end. It's not going to look like it's bunchy in areas. That's really not what you want. You really want to take a little bit of extra time and pin things in place and make things easy on yourself when you go to put that piece back together. Before I install the skirt, I just wanted to show you what the underside looks like. It's really nice and clean. Everything is in place, and I've got the leg covers already installed. So what I'm going to do at this point, I have some pins, and they're just gently stuck into the foam cushion up on top, and basically this is just going to hold this skirt in place temporarily so that I can manipulate it up or down, side to side, in case I need to move it around to make sure that it's situated in the right spot. All right, and before you go ahead and staple this in place, everything looks fine to me. I usually get out a ruler and just double check that 1/2 inch spacing between your floor and the bottom edge of the fabric. So once that's all done, I take the staple gun and I start roughly in the center, and I do that just so that I can be able to manipulate this fabric either by pulling or pushing more toward the center to get this to lay exactly even at the corners. And my first staple is going to go about an 1/8 inch down from the very top edge. Okay, and so these really do need to be close together. So what I would suggest doing is, I have mine about 1.5 inch spacing at this point. I'll do that over the whole thing, and then I'll go back and fill in between each one of those staples to make sure that I have a nice level surface all the way across the entire upholstered piece. I just wanted to give you a close-up on the staples, and you'll see mine are not perfectly level all the way across, but no worries, because I'm going to take a piece of gimp, which is actually a piece of trim, and I'm going to lay it over those staples so you'll never see what's going on underneath. So never be worried about work like that that you think might wind up showing through. If you pick out the right trim, it'll just be perfect. And I'm just going to glue this on, and then the project will be complete. So key to getting this to be nice and neat is just to go ahead and run a little bit of glue over those staples. And then take your trim, and actually the end of the trim is going to go over, slightly over the edge of your project, so that you can join these on the other side, on the side of the project, rather than somewhere in the middle, which might be a bit more noticeable. We want that overlap to occur in the corner. So I'm just going to continue around the exact same way and get all of this glued in place. And you're not being gloppy with your glue. Here's a close-up how I finish this corner. So I have a really sharp pair of scissors, and I clip it exactly into that corner. And you have to always be careful with trim, because this stuff will start unraveling really, really easily. So that's why it needs to be super sharp with your scissors. So glue this in place. You're going to hold that down. Once that's secure, you're going to go back, put a bead of glue so that you can hold, like I've got like these little things kind of hanging out here. So we need to get those down, glued down and secured with just a tiny dab of glue. Don't go crazy on this. Otherwise you'll wind up with a giant mess. Alright, so those are glued into place. Now with this, you'll see I have a little bit here that's kind of fraying a little bit. And I do need, actually I'm just going to keep that just like that, because I think it'll work out a lot better. So basically you're just going to fold this under. I'll put a little bit of glue in there first and fold it under. Now, you have to be careful with your bare hands, because this glue is really hot. This is not a low temp glue gun. So you're just going to get in there and fold it under to create a finished edge, so to speak. Let's get these remaining little tails here glued under. You want all this stuff to be glued to the back side. Alright, so you'll see now how this is the back side, and everything is pretty well secure. Nothing's going to go anywhere. So we're just going to make a test here and run a bead of glue along your inside edge, top to bottom, and then take that and run it over and really press down on this well. Alright, and I think that looks really good. Everything's lined up really well. This is all secured. It's not going to go anywhere.
I hope I've shown you how easy it is to reupholster an ottoman. I've changed the proportions, I've changed the fabric, I've literally changed the whole look of the entire thing. It is super luxe looking. So with a little bit of new upholstery fabric, you could do the same thing on an ottoman you might have around your home. Until next time, this is Renee Romeo, and I'll bring you another great project.